I'm Randy Schwantz. I want to talk to you about what I think of as the three common struggles that I've discovered after having hundreds of hours of conversations with agency principals when it leads to be able to get the kind of growth you want to make. Before I do, I just want to introduce myself. I've been in business since 1992. I've worked with over 300 of the top agencies in North America and the world. I've run almost 2,500 sales meetings, as well as spent a little over 7,000 or 8,000 hours face-to-face, one-on-one with producers. Got a couple of books out, The Wedge, How to Get Your Competition Fired, Red Hot Introductions, and Breaking the Sales Barrier. And then not too long ago, I was fortunate enough to be on ABC World News Today. So let's talk about some of those struggles. What are they? Well, number one that I see is the ability to motivate the bottom 80% of your producers. You know, it's interesting that the top 20%, they always go produce. That's what they do. It's that bottom 80% that's where you get your big opportunity for growth, and really it's that middle 60. Maybe the bottom 20% are dogs and you'll never do anything with them, but that middle 60% of your guys, that's where you get to go get your growth. And here's what's interesting. In many cases, when you hired them, they produced themselves up to making a good income, and then they kind of flattened out and they've worked hard to convince you they can't do anymore. Well, if enough people convince you they can't do anymore, then all of a sudden you can't do anymore. And when you look at the growth of your agency, it starts to stall out. So we want to talk about that. How do you motivate the bottom 80% of your producers to go sell? What's number two? Finding new producers that can sell in this environment successfully. Well, what do I mean by this environment? Well, there's a lot of things that have to do with this environment, but the number one thing that has to do with this environment is that every time a new producer goes out and they're trying to get a new piece of business, the problem is there's always an incumbent there. And that incumbent's got to lose for them to win. And so it's a tough environment. That incumbent in many cases has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year relationship, and they've got a lot of experience. This new guy's got nothing. And so unless we can find a way to more effectively teach them how to go win that business, they get killed. When they get killed, you get killed because you waste that money. So I want to talk about that. What's the next thing? You having time to both produce, manage, and drive sales. Because here's the problem. You know, you're the chief cook and bottle washer, the CEO, the CFO, the COO. You know, you got the biggest book of business. You got the biggest new production goals because that's where you make the majority of your money in many cases. And by the time you manage all that stuff, there's no time left over to manage sales. And so as a result, if you're not careful, things don't grow much. So that's what I want to talk to you about in terms of what I see as the top three common struggles of agency principals. So let's get into it. As we do, I want you to think about what happens when you've got that scenario. And what generally happens is that your growth matches that of the economy and the market. What do I mean by that? Well, when the economy's up, you grow. When the market is hard, you grow. When the economy's down, boom, you don't grow. And when the market is soft, you don't grow. So here's what I found. Is that on average, most agencies grow in direct proportion to what's going on with the market and the economy. And to outperform that is where your multiple and the value of your firm starts to go up. When you outperform that, your profits go up. When you outperform that, it has a huge impact on your firm. When you don't, then in a sense you become a victim of both the market and the economy. And I believe we can help you blow through that because we have with many other agencies. So the big question becomes, how do you smooth out those bumps? Well, the obvious answer is this: build a sales culture. You know, it was a number of years ago, back in 92 when I started this, and about 94, 95, I developed a wedge and started doing wedge sales training. And we did it in public workshops, and people would come to our public workshops and go back to their agency, and then they invite us into their agency and we come do training. And it was common that we'd go into the agency, do some training. 3 to 6 months later, I called back my agency principal. Hey, how's it going? Oh, Randy, pretty good. Well, how are the producers doing with it? Oh, a couple of guys doing really well. Well, what about the other 13? Oh, Randy, you know, change is hard for these people. And so I'm sitting there going, holy cow, if I can't do something, you know, I'm not going to be around very long. So a gentleman that lives in Dallas, Texas, worked for a firm that they went out and they bought up about 6 or 7 or 8 locations, and they wanted to create a common sales culture. And I invited him out to my place, and we talked, and you know, I said to him, his name was Doug, I said, Doug, you know, everybody wants to bring me in to do a little bit of sales training. You know, and the problem is it doesn't really change the culture. In fact, you know, since then I've kind of come up with this whole cliche that most sales training is a waste of money. It's like taking a big obese guy that works in Kentucky Fried Chicken. You want to lose a little bit of weight, so you send him off to Jenny Craig for a little bit of weight loss training and then bring him back to work at Kentucky Fried Chicken. So you tell me what's wrong with that picture. Well, you already know. If you don't change the environment, nothing sticks. So when Doug came out and said we want to create a common sales culture, I said, Doug, I'd like to map out for you my ideas. And what I started mapping out was, you know, certain type of sales training, you know, how to go out and beat the incumbent, how to work for red hot introductions so that you're getting more better prospects, the $1 million producer concept so the producer, you know, really starts to leverage and replicate the top 20% of their accounts that make about 80% of their money. And then I said, what would happen if we had a sales meeting format that all this stuff integrated? What would happen? He goes, I don't know, but I like your idea. So we put together an agreement, mapped it all out, and we went and did our training. And we did it based upon a bonus deal, that if we hit certain numbers, I got paid a huge bonus. Well, 12 months later, sitting there figuring it all out, did his analysis. They paid me a six-figure sum of money. But here's what happened. With 70 producers, previous to that, those 70 producers wrote about $4.9 million new business commission. 12 months later, those same group of 70 producers did a little over $9 million new business commission. We got the credit for the majority of it. When that happened, boom, light goes off for me. Always do it this way. We call it the wedge sales culture. So when I come back to saying, how do you smooth out the bumps? You know, it is build a culture, a sales culture, make it consistent. We call it the wedge sales culture, and that's what I want to talk to you more about. So building a sales culture is like getting in and staying in shape. It takes certain elements. What does it take? Well, number one, it takes this thing we call discipline. I mean, you wouldn't expect to stay in shape if you didn't go work out 2 or 3 times a week, you know, do your jogging, do your weightlifting, do all that sort of stuff, and be disciplined about it. If you didn't do that, you wouldn't be in shape. So that's like the number one thing to creating a sales culture, is create disciplines that you can drive and reinforce and do over and over. What's number two? You gotta have the right equipment. I mean, if you go to the gym and you didn't have the right equipment, then by definition you got the wrong equipment. Several things could happen. You could hurt yourself. But worse than that is if you don't have the right equipment, the chances you're gonna build your body the way you want to become slim. What's the next thing that has to happen? I believe you gotta train. You gotta train to use that equipment effectively. I mean, you've been to the gym. You've seen people come to the gym, hop on the treadmill, kind of walk nice and easy. About 4 or 5 minutes into it, they kind of wipe their little forehead. They walk over, they get a drink of water. They come back, they do a little bit more. And in 30 or 45-minute workout, they worked out maybe what, 5 or 10 minutes? So you got to train on a consistent basis. What's the next thing that happens? Have goals. Is the goal just to show up at the gym this week, or is the goal to get heart rate down, to get cholesterol down, you know, to get body fat down, to have something long-term more so than this? So now when you come back and you talk about how to build a sales culture, I think the same thing is true. You got to have real discipline about what you're going to do, when you're going to do, and how you're going to do it. You know, you got to have the right kind of equipment in place to be able to teach people to give people the tools to be able to go do what they need to do. Then you sit there and you go, you got to train not just once, but over and over and over again. And of course, the last thing is this. If there's no plan, if there's no long-term goal about what you're really trying to do, and there's a regiment, then they don't know what you're going to do. You don't know what you're going to do. And what generally happens? Not much. So these are the elements I believe it takes to really build a culture. Let's keep going. Here's what I want you to think about. Not having a sales culture might not be the real problem. Here's the real problem, is that when you don't have something like that, then a majority of these kind of middle and low producers, they just suck the life out of you. As we talked about a little while ago, they'll work like crazy to convince you that they can't sell. In fact, I've become a believer that many times, like my dog, I believe my dog is better at training me than I am at training my dog. And what's my evidence? My dog barks, I get up and let it out. My dog barks, I get up and let it in. My dog barks, I get up and I go feed it. You know, when I go out in the yard, I'm the one who has to pick up my dog's poop. they don't pick it up. So I can tell you that my dog has trained me better than I've trained my dog. And I bet many of you relate with that. Well, that's how producers are. They train us. In fact, they bark when we say, well, where's your spreadsheet? Well, come on, boss, I've been trying. Hey, how come you're not bringing your prospects to the meeting? Well, yeah, and then all of a sudden they start to give all these things. And if we're not careful, they train us to leave them alone. And many of us have bought that. So in that process, they suck the life out of us. But the problem gets bigger. What's the problem? Well, how do you hire new producers? And see, here's what I've seen happen a lot. You decide you want to hire a new producer. Somehow you met one of your clients, or friends. They've got a son. You interview the guy. You bring him in. He's got a nice personality. You pass him around. Everybody gets a chance to meet him. And you go, let's hire the guy. Whoa. Before you hire him, shouldn't we do a profile? Okay, so then we sign them up for one of the major profiles. They do a profile on them. And then they come back in small print. They go, hire with reservations. So then we do. We hire them with those reservations, thinking, I wonder if they're going to work out. So, about 3 months into the gig, you don't see much going on, but you go, they're new. 6 months into the gig, you start to kind of go, well, are you selling anything? And not much is going on. And 9 months into the gig, you're sitting here forking out this money, sending them off to training, doing all the right things. They're not selling anything. And then you wake up about 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting there going, holy crap, what is going on? And so then you get out your yellow pad. As you get out your yellow pad, you sit there and you start thinking through, what am I spending on this guy? And you sit there and you go, what's my salary? And maybe you're paying him $50K. And then you sit there and go, well, what are we paying in benefits? And maybe there's another $5K right there. And then you sit there and go, well, what are we paying in training? Well, we send them off to a couple of carrier schools. You add that all up, maybe that's $10K with time expenses. And then you sit there and think about what the value of your time and what you've wasted on them, and you put a value on that. And then you come over and you sit there and go, every time I ask them for how many calls you made, what's going on, they just tell me, well, we're doing a lot. But I can't even answer the question, are they making calls? When I say, have you got any quotes coming up, and I see that they've had a couple, but not enough many, they've sold none, and then I sit there and ask myself, what's the potential of this kid? And I go, there's no way they're going to make it. They don't have enough activity. So then I'm sitting there thinking, well, tomorrow morning, I'm going to get to the shop, I'm going to bring them in, I'm going to sit down and have a talk with them, and I'm going to tell them I don't think this is the right business for him. So you do. You show up at the office about 8:30. About 9 o'clock, you pick up your phone, you ask the young guy to come in, have a seat in the office, and you say, how's it going? And to your much surprise, he goes, oh, it's great. Really? Oh, yeah. I met with a guy yesterday afternoon. You wouldn't believe it. Great prospect, about 12 grand in revenue. He's not happy with his current guy. I think we got a great chance of getting this deal. Now you're sitting there thinking, man, I need to put a bullet in this dude, but he just had a little bit of life, a little bit of hope. And then so you just kind of go, okay, well, good luck. All right, then let me know how it goes. Well, what happens? 2 months go by, you never hear from him. Now you're 11 months into the gig. And you're thinking, holy crap, what's going on? You didn't say anything about it, so you call him back in. Remember a couple months ago you told him about that deal? Well, yeah, I remember. And too bad that it didn't happen. But I got another one. Now, I met with a guy yesterday. It's almost 30K in revenue. And, and then all of a sudden they keep on with the same story. And if you're not careful, instead of killing them, you continue to put money into producers that can't sell. And it's a tough gig. Happens to almost everybody. But that's what we want to talk about. How do you stop that process? We're going to get there. What's the solution? Well, we call it iWin. What is iWin? iWin is the wedge integration network. In fact, we want to be to growth what Apple is to the iPhone. One integrated app, easy to integrate, easy for people to use, easy for you to drive, easy for you to do the training. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. So now I want to talk to you about what I consider to be the 5 core elements of extraordinary growth. What are they? Well, number one is commit to grow. A lot of people talk about grow, want to grow, but they never commit to growing. I want to talk to you more about that in a moment. What's the next one? Is to then get a process you believe in. See, if you're committed to doing something, but you don't have a process to drive, then what are you going to drive? We're going to talk about that. What's the next big step? Once you commit, you got a process you drive, you got to train people to do the process. It's no different than if you're a head coach and you commit, I want to go win a championship. I got playbooks. I want everybody to get good at the plays, But if I don't train them in the skills to be able to pull off those plays, they won't be able to. What's the next step? Is then run sales meetings and things to be able to convert those skills, now that you've trained them how to do it, into actions. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And the last is count your results. Let's get going here. Number one, commit. What do you have to commit to? Well, I absolutely believe you got to commit to becoming a proactive services firm. What's the contrast of that? Would be a really good firm that sells price and coverage and reacts to your client's needs. The problem is, I don't see any competitive advantage in that. Let me tell you what I mean. When we take our business and break it down, I break it down in three major chunks: price, coverage, and service. And see, here's the question I got to ask you. Is price for you a sustainable competitive advantage? And most people go, no, it's not. That whatever we bring to the table, anybody else can go match if you give them enough time. So then we go, well, what about coverage? Is coverage for you a sustainable competitive advantage? Now, most people tell me, no, not really. That whatever we bring to the table, anybody else can do. So then we come down, we start looking at service. My experience has been that when I start asking people to talk to me about service, what they really describe is their ability to react to the client's needs. In other words, if a client needs a cert, you'll get it out. If a client had a claim, you'll help get it reported. You know, if a client buys a building, you'll help get it insured. You know, if the client has a complaint, you're there for them. The problem is the standards for reactive service are pretty high, and it's hard to trump the competition in the area of reactive service. So then you already know the answer to this next question. What's the other type of service? We call it proactive service. And my experience is this: when you got your proactive services extraordinarily well defined, then it becomes the proactive services that you do that the incumbent doesn't do is where your prospect is being underserved but doesn't know it. So the more defined you got these proactive services, the easier it is to drive a wedge between your prospect and the incumbent. The less defined you got these proactive services, the more you have to rely on your prospect to tell you where they hurt. The problem is, many times they don't know. How do we know that to be true? Well, just check with your producers. How many times do they go on a sales call, and how many times have you been on the sales call where you start asking the buyer, how's it going? Fine. Any problems with your insurance program? Not really. How's your service been? Okay. Any issues with claims and how they've been handled? No, not really. And if you're not careful, all of a sudden, boom, you hit the wall. Well, that's my evidence that most buyers have done what? Lowered their expectations down to what they're getting, and they're fundamentally content. So what I know is that if you got these proactive services extraordinarily well defined, it really becomes these services that you do that incumbent doesn't do is where that prospect's being underserved but doesn't know it. So what's my whole point? Number one is you got to commit to being a proactive services firm. What's number two? Number two, I believe you got to commit to helping your producers double their book of business in about 3 years with half as many accounts. And see, as they double their book of business, they're also doubling their personal income. Why is this so important? Well, it's been my experience as I've talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of producers, and I'll start to say, what's your new business commission goal? And they'll go, 70? I'm saying, well, when did you make that up? And you could tell just by the way they thought of it that they're not real, that's not integrated, that's not them. And they picked 70 because it's better than 50, and 50 would make them look bad, but they didn't pick 100 because it create too much pressure. 70 is not their goal. It's not their goal. Maybe somebody gave them the goal, or maybe they're throwing it out, but it's not their goal. And what I found out is that most producers are not connected to their own personal goals. That what they do on a day-to-day basis doesn't affect their future in their mind. I've asked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So what we do is we take producers through this thing we call the 30-year timeline. What do I mean? Well, let me tell you real quickly. I was down in Houston a number of years ago, and I was doing a sales meeting down there, and a guy came in late. I'm going, how you doing, boss? He goes, hey, man, I apologize for being late. His name was Paul. I go, and he looked all tired. I go, are you all right? He goes, yeah, I got in late last night. So what are you doing getting in late on a Sunday night? He goes, well, I just got through driving back from Lubbock to Houston, about an 11-hour drive. Well, what are you doing out in Lubbock? He goes, well, I was dropping my daughter off at Texas Tech University. Oh, okay. Well, did you put her up in an apartment or a dorm? He goes, an apartment. I go, first floor, second floor, or third floor? He goes, third floor. I said, elevator or stairway? He goes, stairway. So then basically you pulled the U-Haul out there, carried all her stuff up, set her up in that third floor apartment, then got back in your car and drove home last night. Is that what happened? He goes, yeah, that's it. I go, well, do you have any other kids in school? He goes, yeah, I got one other daughter. I go, well, at least the good news, it's all paid for, isn't it? And he dropped his head and he kind of goes, and that's about all he said. And I remember at that very moment saying to myself, I don't want to be like Paul. I don't want to be where I've got that kind of stress. And here's what's interesting. 18 years and 9 months ago, when Paul did that wild thing with you know who, it was highly predictable that in the future, his kid was going to go off to school, and yet he didn't prepare for it. And here this guy is, he's a risk manager. He works with large businesses. He helps them prepare for risk, and yet he didn't prepare for his own. And I know a lot of salespeople, a lot of producers are just like that. They got all these big things going on in the future, and they're not preparing for it. So it made me think about this. In my family, there's Randy, Lori, Kendall, Hunter, Reagan, and Peyton. If you go back 10 years ago, I'm 43. Lori, I'm not going to tell you. Kendall was 10. Hunter was 8. Reagan was 6. And Peyton was about 3. Now, here's what's highly predictable. If Kendall's 10 at that point, and we sit here and we'll look 30 years out, 6 years from now, which is right about there, Kendall's going to need a car. What's a car cost? Well, it depends on what you want to put your kid in, but we prefer to be safe and give her a nice car that starts in the wintertime, that the air conditioner works in the summertime, you know, that the wheels are not worn out and tired and messed up, and they don't have to like worry about going out there and putting the booster cables on and trying to get her going. So I think a car like that's going to cost about $20K. Well, 2 years after that, she's got to go off to university. And what's that going to cost? Well, everybody gets to pick their own number. But if you got a bright kid, you want to give them an opportunity to go to a bright kids kind of school. And a nice school like that is going to cost at least $150K, maybe more, and you might be able to get by for less. It's up to you. But what's also predictable is about maybe 5 or 7 years after that, she's going to get married and there's going to be a wedding. Now, once again, you get to pick your own number. I believe the number at a minimum basis is going to be about $30K. So then what happens next? There's Hunter. You know, right there, she's going to need a car, university wedding. So car, university wedding, and then another car, university wedding, and then the car, another car, university wedding. And you sit there and add it up, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, and there's 150, 150, 150. And then you got 30, 30, 30, 30, 30. And then Lori and I out here somewhere is the big retirement. You start to add it all up, it's only about $500 million. And I'm just asking you to think about that. When I went to my financial advisor and said, hey boss, this is what I want to do for me and my family. I want to start to prepare for this stuff. It's all out there, it's predictable. How much do I have to save on an annual basis to be able to start to fund this stuff? And he sat down with me and he got his pencils, scratched out a few things. And he goes, are you ready? I go, yeah, I'm ready. He said, well, to really fund all that stuff, if that's what you really want to do, you're going to have to save about $65,000 a year after tax dollars. And I almost threw up. And so then for me personally, that was the why in the road. I could sit there and spend my time trying to convince my wife that's the best I can do, or I could sit there and kind of, now that I know what it is, go change my business to make it happen. Well, our producers are the same way. What's cool about our business, and you know this, is that the income opportunity is unlimited if people want to work. The problem is, I'm saying most of them are not connected to these goals. You, in many cases, if you're like most of the principals I know, you haven't slowed down and made them think about it. In fact, I was dealing with one of my clients out in Arizona who said in the beginning, I've never talked to my people about personal stuff. I've separated personal from professional. I'm going, you just think about it. All these producers are people. It is personal. One of the greatest things you can do as an agency principal is help them accomplish their goals. Number one, get clear on it and help them go produce. And now when you're sitting there helping them accomplish what they want to accomplish, now you can be a lot more powerful as you go at it. When you don't have their goals defined and you're not trying to help them, then in many cases, many of you are not selfish enough to go do it for your own purposes. So to me, this is a big deal. So now I'm going back to what's 5 core elements to create extraordinary growth. Number one's commitment. Commitment to what? A, being a proactive services firm. B is commit to helping your producers double their personal income in about 3 years and do it with half as many accounts. Why half as many accounts? Because we sit there and try to do it with twice as many accounts. Many of them are already out of time. You do it with half as many accounts. Now you can help them grow. Now here's what I'm going to show you. I did this analysis right here with a number of producers. And as I did this, here's what I want you to see. The number of producers right there is 168. It totally added up to $91 million worth of revenue, 17,000 accounts. But here's the averages, and here's what I want you to think about. Based upon 168 producers, 91 million accounts, 17,000, that the average book of business was a little over $500,000, 546,000. Here's what's also interesting. The top 20% of those accounts, which average 22 accounts, those top 22% accounts average $17,773. Here's what's also interesting, that the bottom 43 accounts average $518 each. So when we talk about how to double your personal income in 3 years, have so many accounts, I mean, you sit there and think about it. Get rid of those 43, which make up almost no money, and then do what? Go take these top 22 that now we've got evidence they know how to write, and go leverage to go duplicate that part of their book of business. But they need help. They need help from you. And that's the business we're in, to help you help them. All right, so what's the next big step? You got to have a process to drive. See, I use this whole analogy because I've studied selling both like a psychologist and engineer. You know, what causes producers to crash? And so I think of it like flying. Selling is like flying. If you don't land safely, nothing else really matters about getting your wheels on the runway and getting paid. But here's what's happening. Hanging out at the airport, hiding behind the hedgerow, they got their binoculars, they got their bazooka. The incumbent's watching your plane come in, and they're going, uh-oh, if they land safely, there goes my big check for the month. So then they pull up the bazooka, fire off round, blow you out of the sky. So that to me is like the number one problem with selling, is that the incumbent gets last look. What's the number two problem? Is when you go running down the runway, your ability to lift off and gain altitude is in direct proportion to differentiation. The higher you fly, the more differentiation. You know, the less differentiation, the more you're going over water towers, high lines, mountains, dangerous place to fly. So because of that, we use this whole analogy of selling's like flying and this whole flight plan. So to me, it drives our business process. So let's get in and look at it. Number one is, what's the number one step of the process? Take your best accounts, put them in the maintenance hangar, overserve them, put them on written service timelines. Here's the question I'd ask you. If I went to your best clients as a marketing research, you hired me for that purpose, and I'm going to your best clients and say, hey, what's your agent going to do for you over the next 12, 24, 36 months? What are most of them going to say? Oh, Randy, they're really nice people. We like them. We trust them. They've always been there for us. You know, if we need something, you know, they're going to be there, and they're good people. And by the way, they come out and, you know, they'll bring a little Christmas gift, and they'll renew our stuff and get some information. I like our people. All right, that's one thing. Or would they say, what do you mean, what are they going to do? I like them, I trust them, but more importantly, you know, they've got this written service plan in place, and I know exactly when they're going to deliver policies, do claims review, payroll review, update business interruption, start the marketing, bring that to renewal. It's well defined. I know what they're going to do. So the question is, are most of your clients like this or like this? And I'm hoping they're like this, but I'm betting most of them are like this. So what's the first step? What's the process? You got to define it is, let's overserve the top 20% of our accounts. No big deal. Once you've done that, then you've earned the right to do what? Go leverage them for red hot introductions. It's a part of the process. Here's the deal. When I'm doing sales training on red hot introductions, how to get red hot introductions from your very best clients, and if I got 20 producers in the room, I'll ask, in the last 90 days, please don't lie, in the last 90 days, how many times have you leveraged your top accounts to get introduced into who they know? And the answer is generally about 1 or 2 out of 20 are leveraging relationships, the other 18 are not. Now, when you think about this as an agency principal owner, you got this big asset, it's called your agency, it brings in all this money, but here's the other asset. You got all these clients, and these clients have relationships, and the thing is, these clients can help through those relationships get you into people you want to meet. But if it's not a part of your process, then it happens by accident. And so that's when we have that. What's the next step then? Once you get your appointment set through your red hot introduction, then you go do pre-call strategy, where you're throwing it up on the whiteboard and you're beating it up. You know, who's the incumbent, who's us, and how are we different, how are we better? So then you can go on your sales call, go leverage your differentiation to be able to wedge out the incumbent. You get to that point right there, and now you should have a highly qualified prospect where you have pain, you know what they want, and you found out can they fire the incumbent and hire you. If you don't have the process, if you don't have that well-defined, how are you going to go drive it? Then what happens? You know, it goes to marketing, stays there for 30, 60, 90 days. You come back and present it, and now you got to deal with those last-minute antics and tactics of the incumbent, and you know what they are because you do them to your competition, where you come back in and you leverage guilt, you leverage loyalty, you leverage whatever you need to do what? Try to retain your business. We know it happens. Then you win it, wedge-proof it, and then start the cross-sell and round-out process. All I'm saying is this. If you don't have a well-defined process that everybody's responsible to do, and you help them understand it, then what are you driving? It's almost like it's the difference between a pickup game of football versus having a real structure to be able to move down the field and score touchdowns. So let's go to the next step. Well, before we do, let's talk about what happens if you don't have a process real quickly. Here's what happens. You can't drive an idea. You can talk about it, but you can't drive it. You got to have a process if you want to drive it. What's the next thing? You can't train an idea. You can talk about it, but you can't train it. You can train in a process if you got it well defined. And here's the last thing. You can't measure an idea. You can talk about it, but you can't measure it. So do you have a process well defined? If not, take this one. It's a good one. It works. Now let's move on to our next big step. Number 3 is, once you've got a process well defined, then what do you have to do? Well, you got to then train them to have the skills to pull it off. And one of the reasons that a lot of people don't do things is because they are uncomfortable. Why are they uncomfortable? Because they don't know how. You know, so if you look at this process right here, we got to help them get good at every single element of it. And, you know, it's common that a lot of agencies, they'll send somebody off for a little bit of training and feel good about it. You know, if you told that to any of your buddies on the NFL, NBA, National Hockey League level, they would all laugh at us. What do you mean you trained them once? You trained them once? I'm sorry, you did what? I thought you guys were a professional firm. See, they would laugh at us all. And yet that's what many of us do. We train them once and we say, they're professionals. Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But who couldn't get better? And you could go back to your boys, you know, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods. Pick any of the heroes you want anywhere, on any place, on any planet. And what you know is they train over and over and over again, because that's what it takes to build skills. Well, suppose you did that. What's the next step? Well, before we do, what happens if you don't train for skills? Number 1, you end up with sloppy execution. You know, a lot of people have read my book called The Wedge. And I get a lot of kudos. Great book, Randy. We really liked your book. I already kind of sell that way. Cool. Well, can I hear your wedge? And then what you'll hear is this kind of sloppy execution, and it sounds like the traditional stuff everybody else does. So when you don't train for skills, you get sloppy execution. What's number 2? You get a lot of excuses. Well, you know, I'm just not comfortable with that yet. So then they don't do it. What's the next thing that happens? You know, they're incapable. They don't know how. In other words, if you haven't trained them, they don't know how. You know, one of our elements is making cold calls. Most people don't know how to make cold calls. And they go to, you know, someplace in New York where, you know, that they get the most lowest common denominator that you would train 1,000-person telemarketing force. You know, the people had absolutely no brain to go, hi, my name is Randy Shapiro-Noski. I'm with Exile Lafanagas Insurance Agency, and we have a special program for contractors. Not sure if you qualify, but if so, we could probably save you a lot of money. I was wondering if I could come out and talk to you about our program. Now, the problem with that is I could train anybody to say that. The problem with it is not compelling. It doesn't get that guy in the corner office that has to invite you over. It doesn't strike, you know, it doesn't stir them up. It doesn't make them want to see you. So my point is, when you haven't trained them, they become incapable. What's the next step? Discomfort, unpredictability. So, after you've trained them, let's go back and look at it again. What are the 5 steps to create an extraordinary growth? Number 1, create a commitment to what? Proactive services firm, part A. Part B is help your producers double their personal income in 3 to 5 year period of time. Help them, drive them to do that. Get them connected on why they want it, and then go drive it. What's number 2? You better have a process you're going to drive. How are you going to do it if you don't have a process that you can drive? Once you get the process in place, what's the 3rd step? You got to go train them to do that. You got to give them the skills. We can't just hope they're going to get it. And then what's the 4th step now? Here's number 4. You got to be able to then convert those skills into actions. See, I've got 4 daughters. They've all got the skill of being polite. They just don't always act that way. So now we got producers that have the skill, if we've done an effective job of training them, they've got the skill of overserving their top clients. They've got the skill of working red hot introductions. They've got the skill of pre-call and red hot and wedge. They got these skills. The problem is they don't always go do it. And so unless your sales meeting drives turning that stuff into action, it probably won't work. But see, here's when I look and have been to a lot of sales meetings, here's what most of them look like to me. In fact, I remember going to Chicago after a lady called me one day. She says, "Hey, Randy, I read one of your articles. Would you mind coming up and auditing one of our sales meetings?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, you want me to do what?" "Yeah, would you mind come auditing one of our sales meetings?" I could, but why would you want me to do that?" She goes, "You come, you'll see." Okay. So, she agreed to pay me some money. We booked it. I went up there and I sat in the sales meetings, and it was like this. When you walk in, they had about 30 people sitting around in a big U shape. What was interesting, they only had about 10 producers. You look on one side of the room, it was set up with, coffee and bagels, and just a really nice spread. And then the meeting got started. And of course, the CFO comes in and puts the numbers up from last month, talks about the numbers a little bit. Sales manager then steps up, sits there and goes, starts working down the room, going, "Has anybody had any success? Any new sales?" Of course, most people are ducking their head, but this one guy raises his hand and go, "Yeah, what have you done?" And he takes his 30-second story and turns it into about 3 minutes all about him and how great he is. And we're thinking, take that dude out. And then we start going around the room going, anybody have anything new in the pipeline? Of course, once again, everybody ducks. Of course, this one guy, different guy, raises his hand and go, "Well, what have you got?" And he says something like, "Well, I'm working on the equivalent of GE, General Motors, and Microsoft." And we're thinking, "You lying sack of poo? No way. Take you out too." And it becomes, most of these sales meetings, a liar's club. Real data doesn't get out. Helping people sell doesn't happen. So then after that, then an underwriter came in and gave their whole deal. Where they go, "Hey man, we got this special program. I got some leaflets out there for you. I just want to let you know we want to partner with you, and we're here for you, and we'll do anything we can to do business with you. And I know you have bagels and stuff like that, but I brought some donuts, and I hope that you enjoy them." And then the underwriter leaves. And then this guy takes it, boom, hits me in the ribs, and I go, "What was that for?" He goes, "See what I told you? A waste of time. This is not helping us at all." And now underwriter's going to go to our #1 competitor tomorrow and say the same thing. "Hey, we're here to help. We want to partner." There's no partnership. Why don't we let those people come in here? And then after that, you got these 2 third-generation brothers that start fighting. Anyway, about 90 minutes into the meeting, it's all over. Everybody walks out of there with their head down. Nobody learned anything about selling. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, this thing needs some snap, crackle, and pop, something that really helps. And we came up with a sales meeting format we call CRISP. Stands for Continuous and Rapid Improvement Sales Process. Let's have CRISP sales meetings that drive what? Drive sales. Help people sell, help people leverage relationships, help people go beat the incumbent. But most sales meetings are not like that. So now I'm going back to, what are the 5 core elements to extraordinary growth? Commit to growth, get a process, train people to do the process. Once you've trained them, now let's convert those skills into actions. And this sales meeting right here, as you can see, the sales meeting format drives that step of the process. The sales meeting format drives that step of the process. The sales meeting format drives that step of the process. The sales meeting format drives that step of a process. If you don't have a sales meeting that drives your process, why don't you call them marketing meetings, call them renewal meetings, but let's not call them sales meetings. Sales meetings should help you go sell. So what's the fourth step? Convert your skills to actions. And then what's the next one? Well, what happens when you don't? When you don't run great sales meetings, here's what happens. New producers don't learn as fast. See, here's what I found out. Now, one of the steps of our sales meeting is what we call a genius extraction process. In other words, generally sitting around the room, there's a ton of genius. I mean, you got some people with 20 years of experience and some with 15 and maybe even some with 30. They know a lot about the business, they know a lot about their competition, but there's no effective way to get that genius out of their brain and map it out. So what happens is new producers don't learn nearly as fast when you don't have a high quality process to get that out. And what happens when new producers don't learn as fast? They go out, they get busted by the incumbent. They go out, they get busted by the incumbent. They go out, they get busted by the incumbent. They start to lose confidence. Their spirit goes down. They get where they don't want to do much. And before long, you have to do what? You have to fire them because they can't make it. And all I'm saying is if you run great sales meetings, your new producer effectiveness goes way up. I'm going to tell you about a good friend of mine named Keith. He's out on the West Coast. His new hiring effectiveness has gone from about 20% to over 80%. The time it takes to validate a new producer has gone from about 36 months down to 22 months. You just tell me what that's worth. And I'm telling you that the sales meeting, this whole cultural thing, has a huge impact on all of that. What's the next thing that happens? When you run the type of sales meetings I'm talking about, you don't have to guess what they know. You'll know what they know because I teach you a way to really map it out in the pre-call strategy, genius extraction process, getting this stuff. I teach you how to get out of them what they know so that then you can help them leverage what they do know, but more importantly, what they don't know. Now we can sit there and go coach them. Here's the problem. Most producers have either pride and ego. And so, if you say, do you need any help? They all duck their head. So I got a strategy. I don't ask them, do they need any help? We just go right into doing a lot of abstraction and doing a pre-call strategy and start to work it out. And then through that process, you find out what they know and what they don't know. And now you can start to coach them and help them get better. What's the next step? Here's the problem when you don't have great sales meetings. Mature producers just hide. Again, you need help? No, I'm fine. Do they produce a lot? Some of them do, but a bunch of them don't. And you know they don't. And unless you've got a sales meeting to drive that process, you've trained them the skills and you've set up the process and created those expectations, then you've got these huge assets, and it's almost like having cash. And of course, sometimes your attitude is, well, they're not costing me any money. Okay. And they are making me some money. All right. Well, they're not making near as much as they could. And it's almost like having stocks that are underperforming compared to what they're capable of. So mature producers hide out. What's the next thing? Skills don't convert to actions. And I'm telling you, tell me that many of your producers don't know how to go get referrals or ask for introductions. I mean, they know, they just don't do it. So when you got a great sales meeting, that happens. Now here's the other big deal. As an agency owner principal, chances are you spent tens of thousands of dollars, 50s of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on buying value-added differences that your producers can go sell. What do we mean by that? Maybe from just having a claims clerk, you really got a claims management person. Rather than waiting for the carrier to do loss control, you've invested in your own in-house loss control. Maybe you went and bought one of the electronic technological services, being online enrollment or some of those other things that are provided out there, and you've spent a lot of money to help both retain clients but also help them go win business. When you don't run great sales meetings that drive those differences, then that investment you got in that stuff gets way diminished. And then here's the other thing. We talked about it before. Your producers have a lot of relationships. They're not asking for it. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars with every producer of relationships where they could go get introduced in through one of their top clients into somebody that if they cold call that somebody, that person will never take their call. But through working that introduction, they can get in on a red carpet basis and radically increase their chance to go write that business. You're leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. Why? Because you don't have a sales culture. You don't have a process. You're not training them in skills. You're not converting those skills into actions. Number 5, count your results. The key to accountability, the root word of accountability is to count. If you don't have systems in place where you can count what's going on, how do you count and create accountability? How do you know which clients are on some sort of written service timeline? How many intros have been asked for and what's happened with it? What prospects are in the pre-call strategy? What prospects are in the marketing phase? What prospects have been presented? What got sold? What's your closing ratios? What's your average revenue per relationship with new accounts being written? All that stuff, without the right kind of systems, you don't know. Now, I know you know in your gut, just like you know in your gut which stocks are performing and which ones aren't. But without being able to go online and really look it up and see what the performance is, you don't know, and you can't take action to get rid of bad stocks and buy more good stocks. And that's how there's a lot of systems. What happens when you can't count? You can't lead because you don't have real data. When you can't lead, you also can't manage because you don't have real data. What's going to happen is you're going to keep having a real bumpy ride. So, here's some of the challenges with executing with what's going on out there. I call it disparate resources. What do I mean? If you really want to go out and build this great culture, where are you going to get that thing that you're going to commit to? And there's some great books out there. Good to Great has been out on the market 6, 7, 8, 9 years. Get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. Great concept. Rockefeller Habits, which goes after John D. Rockefeller and what was his habits. Or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen F. Covey. There's a lot of things you could go. What are you going to go get and commit to so that you can drive it? And then you come down to what's going to be your business process. Well, for many people, they don't have one, and there's no real good resource to go define it. What's the next big step? Is training for skills. Well, there's a lot of training out there. Dynamics of selling, Sandler selling, spin selling, question-based selling's everywhere. The problem is most of this stuff doesn't match up. Let's keep going. Sales management, sales meetings. Where are you going to go get your resource on that? You can go to the Wharton School of Business. You can go to buy the book Value Added Sales Management. There's a ton of books. There's books everywhere. There's so many books you can't read them all. And once again, they don't integrate. And then you go to accountability. What are you going to do that? You got Salesforce.com, Goldmine, Act. That some people are giving away free software for it. But here's the problem. Let me move to this next page. It's like taking all these different disparate pieces. This one's got 6 sides. That's got 3 sides. That's a circle. That's got 4 sides. That's got a different deal. The problem is these blocks weren't made to fit together. So the problem is when you want to go drive a culture, you've got some of this, some of that, some of this, some of that, and they're not made to fit. And so you spend a lot of your time doing what? Retrofitting, trying to figure out how to make them fit, and it's a waste of time. And so most people just kind of give up. Well, what do we want to do for people? Well, it becomes pretty simple. We want to make it easy. And our solution is what we call I Win, the wedge integration network. And the key word there is that middle word called integration or integrated. It's like when the pieces were made to fit, it sure does work a lot better. It's like if you wanted to go do a high performance car. You could go to different auto parts store and you could go get a great engine one place and great transmission somewhere else, and you get a body that you think is really cool, and then you could put some seats in there and all this sort of stuff, and you might have a great race car. The problem is you're going to spend the majority of your time trying to retrofit all those parts and make them work. You could just go down to the Porsche dealership and get a brand new 911 C4S turbo that was made to go fast, 200 miles an hour. It's there for you. All the parts built to work together. So what are we talking about? I Win is not only to help you integrate wedge and a culture into your firm, but the tools are integrated. Again, we want to be to growth what Apple is to the iPhone. One totally integrated app, your commitment, your philosophy, your business process, the skills training, your sales meeting management, your database CRM tool, all integrated to work together rather than a whole bunch of disparate parts. So here's what happens. In our system, commitment to philosophy is be a product or services firm, help your producers double their book of business. Business process is the flight plan. Training, we've got this thing called Little Randy. I've spent hours and hours and hours in the studio, just like I am right now, using the same sort of tools that we built to be able to train you to then go back and use this type of tool to go train your producers. It's proven to be very effective. We trained well over 1,200 producers this way, and the numbers are going up daily. It's called Little Randy. Instead of having me come, and see, many of your agencies, you can't afford to have somebody like us come. Now, what you can do, and some of my competition, is you can put people on the plane 2 by 2 and fly them down to some sort of location. The problem is, you know, you don't do a full deep immersion for everybody and get them on a path going. So that's what the Little Randy does. Sales meeting process, we call CRISP. It's all there. Accountability, a tool we call Profit 2. It's all there. All these pieces are built to work together. So we call it I Win. Because when your producers work for you, they ought to be able to say clearly, I win. I win working here. It's a great place. And what I found is that when you do this type of deal, not only is it great for your internal producers, but when you're out there trying to recruit producers and they could go to work at your firm or some other firm, you've got to ask the question, why you? How is your firm different? How is your firm better? And when you got a system like this that you can recruit them into, or they could go to another agency that's just an average typical agency that's got no systems, it's got no processes, won't drive, they'll hire them and they're on their own. If it were you, would you rather go there or would you rather come here? And hopefully the answer is you'd rather come here. Look, it's been a pleasure being with you today. And I hope you got the educational value out of this, because there's 5 core elements. I'm just going to say them again. Number 1, commit to being great. Commit to growth. Commit to helping your producers double their book of business. Commit to being a proactive services firm. Once you've got that commitment, then go do what? Have a process that you can communicate to everybody. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing. Get people on that page. Number 3 is then go train them to be great at these elements. Give them the skills to be able to go out and succeed. And then number 4, convert those skills to actions. And then number 5, so you know what's going on, put yourself in a position to be able to create accountability by counting what's going on and integrating all these tools. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope to see you down the road.